This is not breaking news. This is not a scandal. This is not about one person. This is about something quieter and far more dangerous. What happens when a state still has uniforms, still has weapons, still has speeches, but loses control of the systems that make those things usable? Not the crowds, not the slogans, the infrastructure beneath them, because power does not live where we are taught to look. It lives where food enters, where fuel moves, where money circulates. And when those arteries stop responding, authority doesn't fall dramatically. It hollows out silently. Mathematically, you may feel like this is happening all at once. It isn't. It's been building for years, hidden behind routine and normalization. If you want to understand what actually ends regimes, not symbolically, but mechanically, stay with me. Because the most important part of this story is not where people are shouting, it's where nothing is moving anymore. And that changes everything. What actually controls a country is rarely what appears on television. Not the speeches, not the flags, not even the force. Control lives in coordination, in schedules, in ports opening on time, in valves turning when they're supposed to. A modern state is not a throne. It's a machine. And machines don't respond to ideology. They respond to flow. When ships stop unloading, loyalty doesn't argue. It recalculates. When refineries go quiet, authority doesn't negotiate. It weakens by the hour. This is why regimes obsess over borders, docks, pipelines, corridors, not because they are symbolic, but because they are executable power. You can survive crowds in the streets. You cannot survive an economy that refuses to move. And here's the part that's easy to miss. These systems don't collapse all at once. They fail asymmetrically, one node at a time, which means by the time leaders understand what's happening, the system has already chosen a direction. And the next shift is the most dangerous one. For decades, the most important change didn't look like a change at all. Nothing exploded. Nothing collapsed on camera. Instead, control slowly migrated away from institutions and into infrastructure. Ports became leverage. Energy became discipline. Logistics became obedience. Before, power was enforced by presence. Police, courts, commands. Now, power is enforced by dependence. On import, on fuel, on parts that must arrive on time or not at all. This shift was normalized, outsourced, optimized. Workers didn't issue demands through microphones. They acted through absence. Valves closed, production halted. This wasn't chaos. It was coordination. The shock wasn't that people were angry. It was that the system complied with them. Imports stalled. Fuel calculations broke. Security logistics stopped lining up on spreadsheets. And suddenly, a government that still had weapons couldn't move them, couldn't fuel them, couldn't reliably pay the people holding them. If you're still thinking this is about demonstrations, you're already behind the story. Because once infrastructure chooses a side, there is no fast way back. Stay with me. Because the next part explains why this kind of shock spreads faster than force ever could. Here's the part most analyses skip, because it sounds technical. And technical things don't feel dramatic, but this is where outcomes are decided. A state doesn't run on belief. It runs on sequencing. Money arrives, fuel moves. Orders are executed. Loyalty is rewarded. Break that order, and nothing downstream works the way it's supposed to. The people who benefit from this system are not the ones you see. They sit at junction points. Import licenses, energy distribution, security, procurement. They profit when flow is smooth. They panic when it isn't. Because when ports stall and refineries pause, the damage doesn't fall evenly. It concentrates. At the bottom, people feel scarcity. At the top, power loses predictability. And predictability is what keeps coercion cheap. Once the state has to improvise logistics, it burns cash fast. Once it burns cash, it starts choosing who gets paid. Once it chooses, it reveals weakness. That's the hidden mechanism, not collapse. Exposure, and once exposure happens, the system enters a faster phase. Then the tempo changes. Not slowly, not cautiously, all at once. Security deployments arrive late. Fuel allocations don't match requests. Orders conflict. People notice. Checkpoints hesitate. Uniforms ask questions. Paperwork matters more than commands. This is what acceleration looks like, not explosions. Friction. Every delay multiplies the next one. Every workaround creates a new gap. A truck waits for clearance that never comes. A unit waits for fuel that's been redirected. A payment waits for authorization that no longer exists. Nothing dramatic happens. And that's the danger, because systems don't fail when they're attacked. They fail when they can't keep up with their own complexity. At this stage, even loyalty becomes logistical, not ideological. And once the people enforcing order begin calculating risk instead of obedience, the balance shifts permanently. The state is still standing, but it's no longer synchronized. And desynchronization spreads faster than panic ever could. This is where it reaches you, not as a headline, as a delay. You feel it when shelves thin without explanation, when prices jump without warning, when service is slow and no one can tell you why. This isn't chaos, it's consequence. You're told to be patient, to wait, to trust that systems will correct themselves. But systems don't correct. They redistribute pressure. And it always lands on the people least able to absorb it. Your time, your income, your sense of predictability. When infrastructure fractures, daily life becomes a series of calculations. What can I afford today? What might disappear tomorrow? That uncertainty changes behavior. People save instead of spend. They hesitate instead of comply. And that hesitation feeds back into the system, accelerating the strain. If this feels familiar, it should. Because once these dynamics appear, they don't stay contained. If you want to understand why this kind of breakdown never remains local, why it always crosses borders, stay with me, because the ripple doesn't stop here. What begins as a local failure doesn't remain local for long, because infrastructure is shared. Trade routes overlap. Energy markets don't respect borders. When a major port slows, schedules collapse across regions you've never visited. When oil production pauses, prices react everywhere. Not tomorrow, but immediately. Ships reroute, insurance premiums spike, supply chains tighten preemptively. Nothing waits for confirmation. Other governments don't ask whether the situation is stable. They assume it isn't, and they act accordingly. Strategic partners quietly distance themselves. Investments freeze. Agreements become optional. This is how isolation begins. Not with sanctions, with uncertainty. And uncertainty is contagious. Once one state proves that economic arteries can be seized from below, others start scanning their own vulnerabilities. Ports, refineries, corridors. What looked like a domestic crisis becomes a template. And templates travel faster than ideology ever did. The question stops being, will this be contained? It becomes, who's next? And that question doesn't have a reassuring answer. From here, the future doesn't move in a straight line. It branch. There are 3 paths, all of them unstable. The first is adjustment. The system partially adapts new routes, emergency controls, temporary workarounds. Enough flow is restored to delay collapse, but not enough to rebuild trust. This path looks calm on the surface. It isn't. It stores pressure. The second path is erosion. Slow, grinding, degradation. Each week brings a little less capacity, a little more improvisation, a little more quiet withdrawal from responsibility. Nothing breaks dramatically, but everything works worse than before. Then there's rupture, the moment when accumulated strain outruns management. When coordination fails faster than it can be patched. When one missed delivery triggers 10 more, and the system gives way all at once. None of these paths announce themselves in advance. They overlap. They blur. And here's the unsettling part. Once a system enters this phase, choice becomes illusion. Momentum takes over. Which path emerges depends less on leadership than on timing. On thresholds crossed without noticing, and we won't know which one we're on until we're already too far in to turn back.